Would you survive a day in London's Newgate Prison, known to medieval Londoners as Hell on Earth? Imagine entering a place where the screams of the condemned echo through dark corridors, and the smell of decay lingers in the air. Welcome to Newgate Prison, the notorious medieval jail that held some of the most desperate souls in England. The prison story began in 1188, under the rule of King Henry II, who sought greater control over crime in England's growing capital. Newgate was built within the ancient Roman walls of London, at a gatehouse above the aptly named Newgate, one of the 7 original entrances to the city. Initially just a small holding area, this prison soon grew infamous. A simple set of cells eventually expanded into a full-fledged jail with a sinister reputation. By the 13th century, Newgate was widely feared, a symbol of misery, despair, and death, so dreaded that even execution was seen as a welcome escape. The legal system of the early Middle Ages saw prisons merely as holding cells where suspects awaited trial, not as places of punishment. King Henry II's judicial reforms, known as the Assize of Clarendon, radically reshaped English law. These reforms brought jury trials to the forefront, moving away from medieval trials by ordeal or trial by combat, which often relied on divine judgment rather than factual evidence. As cases increased, Newgate and other prisons in London became dangerously overcrowded, holding a mix of criminals and those simply waiting for trial. There was no division by crime or social class. Murderers, debtors, thieves, and pickpockets all found themselves behind the same cold, grimy walls. Newgate's interior reflected medieval social divides. Wealthier prisoners could bribe keepers for extra comforts like private, less crowded cells, better food, and bedding. Known as wards, these cold stone cells reeked of waste, and diseases spread rapidly. The wealthiest prisoners might live in relative comfort, but for those without money, Newgate was a tormenting descent into the depths of despair. Newgate's dungeons, situated below ground, formed a labyrinth of terror. Prisoners were often shackled to walls or confined in stocks to prevent their escape, especially those awaiting execution. Some, left forgotten, died of starvation or disease, while others languished in filthy conditions, surrounded by vermin. Lice, bedbugs, and fleas were so pervasive that visitors reported hearing them crunch underfoot. With no sanitation or fresh air, the dark, damp prison became a breeding ground for sickness, and jail fever, likely typhus, swept through its corridors, killing inmates and even guards alike. During particularly bad outbreaks, the prison would close, as it did in 1419, when 22 inmates perished in a single year. The medieval prison was managed by a keeper, typically a figure who wielded brutal authority and demanded payment from inmates for every service. Underpaid, these keepers relied on bribes to keep their pockets full, charging prisoners for food, lighter shackles, or even basic supplies. The rich could buy relative comfort, but the poor suffered terribly. Some keepers were notoriously corrupt, and in 1244, a sheriff sergeant named John Shep faced charges after throwing an inmate into a cell so violently that the prisoner's neck snapped. Similar accounts arose in the early 14th century, with keepers convicted of torture and extortion. One keeper, Ed de Laura, charged prisoners 4 times the legal rate for removing shackles, while another was imprisoned for raping a female inmate in 1449. Female prisoners were held in similarly dire conditions. Women walked past the men's quarters to reach the latrines, often feeling exposed and humiliated. Overcrowding led to frequent physical interaction between male and female prisoners, resulting in pregnancies among inmates. Some women, condemned to hang, used pregnancy as a means to delay execution, a process known as pleading the belly. For some, it was a survival tactic, although the nature of their conditions suggests that many were victims of exploitation or worse. Newgate's dreadful reputation seeped into the city's psyche, sparking legends that still endure. Stories of a spectral black dog haunting the prison grounds emerged, said to appear on the eve of executions. The creature was believed to be a grim omen, representing the suffering and vengeful spirits of those who had died in misery. Even today, some claim to hear the whispers of former prisoners in the cellars of nearby buildings, particularly beneath the Viaduct Tavern, a Victorian pub that still stands over some of Newgate's old foundations. In 1423, Richard Whittington, the wealthy and famous Lord Mayor of London, left money in his will to improve Newgate's dismal conditions. His funds helped construct a new gatehouse and larger cells, which included a chapel and even a water fountain, although the water, drawn from the polluted River Fleet, brought further illness. Yet, despite these efforts, Newgate's keepers continued to exploit prisoners, extorting the desperate for every penny and reserving basic necessities for those who could afford to pay. As the Middle Ages progressed, imprisonment shifted from a holding practice to a punishment in itself. Sentences could range from a few days to lifelong imprisonment, depending on the crime. Criminals could be condemned to life at Newgate for stealing something as minor as a hawk or engaging in repeated acts of violence. The prison's population was largely made up of thieves, debtors, and minor offenders, though some notorious criminals also ended up in Newgate. The famous Sir Thomas Malory, author of Le Morte d'Arthur, spent years here, using his connections to secure comforts like paper and ink to continue his writing. By 1777, Newgate was demolished, its infamy cemented in history. Today, the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court, stands on its former site. Across the street, a modest blue plaque marks the grim location of one of England's darkest prisons, now only a shadow of its notorious past. The tales of torment and despair linger still, a reminder of the cruel justice system of medieval England. The specter of Newgate, once hell on earth, is gone, but the chilling memories of its suffering endure.